Welcome to Classic Patronum, the channel dedicated to the times of old. There was something very special about Frank Capra's films which separated him from most of his contemporaries. Instead of aiming to impress the audience with clever editing and visuals, Capra took a different approach by aiming to stir the very core of what makes us all human, and that is our emotions. In explaining what the concept of a drama meant to him and what he had learned through years of directing it, he's quoted as saying, "I made mistakes in drama. I thought drama was when the actors cried, but drama is really when the audience cries." Most Capra films can be summarized in this. A virtuous everyday man is plunged into an environment where the people view his way of life and thinking with a cynical, if not dismissive eye. Usually the protagonist has to fight against a corrupt system, like a monopolistic bank or government institution. Obviously the protagonist wins in the end, but not without first getting defamed and losing his reputation in the public's eye. Of course, this summary doesn't do enough justice to the entirety of Capra's diverse filmography, but his most memorable directorial efforts like 1939's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or 1946's It's a Wonderful Life follow this general narrative structure quite religiously, so much so that critics in his day would often accuse him of repeating himself. And speaking of critics, Frank Capra movies were often criticized for being overly sentimental, especially when the world seemed to be falling apart during and after the Second World War. The negative reception was comprised of critics lamenting the wishy-washy, sugar-coated stories which were considered unrepresentative of the times. In a sense, there was some truth in the general consensus in what the critics had to say about his films. The way a Frank Capra movie ended was with the main protagonist triumphing against all odds through some miraculous incident, often an implied intervention of some external divine power, instead of the inherent ability of the hero. But to dismiss Capra's films as being detached from reality and preachy is in itself an act of denying the real instances of life where miracles do happen. The fantasy classic It's a Wonderful Life, starring James Stewart as George Bailey, is perhaps the defining film of Capra's entire career. From Bailey's life being saved by a guardian angel from committing suicide, and the angel showing him what life in his neighborhood would be if he was never born, Bailey ultimately realizes how much his life has touched others for the better, even though that meant him giving up his dreams to help them. In the final moments of the film, George Bailey is showered with donations from his neighbors when they hear that he's about to lose his business to a greedy banker, Mr. Porter, who is the embodiment of corporate evil and corruption. Sure, the resolution to the story may be a bit too convenient, but the first time I watched this scene, I cried, which is not something I usually do when watching movies. Perhaps it was because I saw myself in George Bailey, I don't know. His story of self-sacrifice and the consequences of putting other people first somehow resonated with me. And it was the 1941 film Meet John Doe that forever brought me out of the black hole of suicidal thoughts and depression, as I realized that self-inflicted death wouldn't solve anything for me or my loved ones. So the first truly old documentary I'd ever watched was The Battle of Russia, Part 4 in the Why We Fight series, directed by Frank Capra. The visuals are forever burnt in my memory, and the impact that this 70-year-old documentary impressed upon me has been nothing short of monumental. So, If I could point to a single moment where my love for classic film was born, it would be on that day when my 11-year-old self was going through my dad's DVD collection. I knew that my life would never be the same again when I first saw this.
This is a film about that scale and grandeur. This is a film about that military achievement. This is a film about a people who for all time shattered the legend of Nazi invincibility. This is a film about victory and defeat.
Well, that's it for this week's video. I would love to hear your own experience of watching a Frank Capra film. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Classic Patronum for more upcoming videos about classic cinema. Once again, thanks for watching.